All right, we'll call to order the Tuesday, January 2nd meeting of the Scandia Planning Commission. If you would all join me in saluting the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You had a chance to look at the agenda, any changes or amendments?
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Moved. And any changes to the minutes or a chance to look over the minutes? Any changes? No? Motion?
Move to approve the minutes of December 5 meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So moved. And that brings us to our first public hearing, which is on the development code related to comp plan reviews. Or, sorry, concept plan reviews. I had comp plan on the line. Just for anybody who's not used to our procedures, this is a public hearing. We'll get the report from our city planner first, and then after she's done with her report, then we'll open it up for public comments. After the public comments are over, we'll close it, and then we'll have our discussion. All right, Sherry?
All right, so this is an amendment you guys have been looking at for a few months, and that is to add the idea of a concept plan review to the conditional use permit process as an optional part of that process. And this came about last year because we had reviewed a fairly complex conditional use permit, and at the end of it, it seemed like it would have been worthwhile both for the owner and for the planning commission to have had a chance to look at a concept plan, and that he could have focused his stuff more. You guys would have had a little better idea of what was going on. I think changes could have been made at a concept level to comply better with the ordinance rather than going directly to the full submittal. And so it was based on that we talked about this at a couple of meetings. At the last meeting, we talked about the fact that this can be an administrative review. It would not necessarily add extra cost for the applicant if it was something that Neil worked on with you guys, and the engineer and I were not involved in this level of review. That would be an option for Neil to suggest staff involvement if needed, but it could just be at a concept level. And I think Greg mentioned last time that you thought as a builder that this could be a useful thing for someone to get a concept reaction before they did the full application. So based on that, that's what we have in front of us, is adding a concept plan review as an option, with the review being done administratively for the most part, with it being comments only. Nobody would make a decision to approve or deny at this point, just comments, and using a process that's very similar in your subdivision ordinance for major subdivisions. So it's a process that exists in your ordinance in another place already.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll open it up to the public. Does anybody have any comments on this particular item?
I have a question, actually.
If
Are
you
there
could
criteria
approach
for... Thank you.
podium and
Oh.
state your name and address, please. Thank you.
Pam Arnold, 16560 220 Street North, also known as Salt and Pepper Farm LLC. Are there criteria for what a concept plan is? Is there a specific description so that when one proposes such a thing, we would know what that is?
So what the new ordinance says is that the concept plan should include a general description of the proposed use, the activities that are proposed for the site, the hours of operation, the size of what they're proposing, and a sketch plan of the site with the proposed uses and structures on it, such as parking areas. And it may include a schedule, it does not have to. So that kind of basic, a real basic site plan with the uses shown, what use you're doing, how big you expect it to be, hours, kind of the most basic stuff. But not a full-blown engineered sort of plan, more of a site sketch.
So no references to septic or any other kind of infrastructure thing?
That's listed here, so it can include, the sketch should include parking areas, the access location, proposed sewage treatment facilities where water will come from, and a general concept for storm drainage.
Thank you.
Any other comments? All right, we'll close the public portion of the discussion. I'll open it up to the commission. Do you guys have any further thoughts beyond what we talked about last week?
I don't, I think it's a good idea, that it just adds a little more understanding before we get to everything.
Sure. A little bit of an option for expense.
And it's optional.
Right.
And I've always appreciated that when I was building houses, I put my toe in the water versus throwing all in, because then I could knowledgeably report back to the customer or homeowner and say this is what some issues might be, and let's think about that. So it's just a nice way to get a feeling for what we're going to have to deal with.
Okay. Any-
Well, with that, I make a motion that we approve the ordinance amending Chapter 1, Section 8 of the Development Code related to procedures of public or review concept plan for conditional use permits.
Second?
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
So moved. All right.
All right, ready
Move
for
right
number
along
2?
to our next one, solar energy systems.
All right, so the city recently repealed the part of the development code that permits community solar gardens and farms, the big solar installations that are the primary use on the parcel. But at the same time, the Planning Commission identified a need to update the part of the code that allows accessory solar systems so that that was current. We had previously had something in just about passive solar systems, but nothing about other kinds of accessory solar systems. So we have talked about this for a few months, talked about it the last time at the December meeting. And at that meeting, you guys came to some conclusions about the size of the structures that would be allowed without anything but a building permit, and also ones that might need a conditional use permit, and how this would relate to other kinds of accessory structures in the code. So the key elements of this ordinance, just to review them, are that this is an accessory solar energy system ordinance. They would be permitted in all of the zoning districts as an accessory use to the primary use. And the definition we decided on last time is that accessory use means as an accessory use, a solar energy system is permitted to the extent that it operates primarily to provide solar energy for the primary use and permitted accessory uses on the property on which it's located. This ordinance would permit not only the passive solar energy systems, but also roof and building mounted systems and ground mounted systems. And it has performance standards for each of those kinds of systems. The ordinance would allow one ground mounted solar energy system up to 800 square feet in size, that's the footprint of the system, with approval of just a building permit for both residential and commercial uses. And we decided on that number because some other places have done some studies that found a typical house can have a 10 kilowatt system generally to operate successfully with solar. And typically those would cover something like 700 square feet based on the ones we've looked at recently in Scandia. And so you decided on 800 square feet, assuming that would help to take care of a typical house. Above 800 square feet, people would need to get a conditional use permit for a system because those get to be bigger, might have some issues about where they're located, about impervious cover and those kinds of things. The maximum permitted height of the ground-mounted systems is 15 feet when they're at maximum tilt. You guys decided that accessory solar structures should not count toward the maximum amount of lot coverage as long as the system is vegetated underneath. That accessory systems also would not count toward the maximum number and area of accessory structures that are permitted on the parcel. And we did some special discussion about solar systems in shoreland areas. They're permitted in shoreland based on this draft ordinance. But your development code does not permit accessory structures in front yards without a variance. On a lake property, the front yard is the lake side. So someone who wanted one of these could not put it between the house and the lake. They would need to put it on the other side. And we decided to add a standard that requires screening for ground-mounted SESs on that road side of the lakeshore parcels if they're located within 100 feet of the road right-of-way. So those are kind of the main points of it, and tonight is your night to hear from anybody else who has comments about this.
All right, thank you. So we'll open up the public discussion for solar accessory structures. Hi there. Please state your name and address.
Erica Forsman, U.S. Solar, 100 North 6th Street, Minneapolis, Minnesota. So my name is Erica Forsman. I work for U.S. Solar. We're a community solar developer that's local, based in Minneapolis. And I'm here tonight to respectfully request of the chair and the commissioners that in addition to revisiting the accessory use ordinance, that you also follow through with the same process for community solar. We were working with a local landowner this summer on what I feel could be a much more ideal site for a smaller 8-acre community solar garden, over 400 feet from a public right-of-way, unaware of the conversations that you were having to repeal that ordinance. We did sign a lease with that landowner, and I understand the need to repeal and put more restrictions around what community solar gardens need to look like to better fit in with that aesthetic. As a local company, we work with jurisdictions across the state, and I think several of them have had a similar experience to Scandia, where you get typically out-of-state developers came in during the kind of gold rush, if you will, put up very large solar arrays, didn't really care as much about the visual impact for the community. And we're hoping that we get the opportunity to work with you to put more restrictions around how community solar can be done well to better integrate. Things like reducing the height to 10 feet. They don't need to be 15 feet tall, and that can make a big impact in terms of visual. You can then do landscape screening around them, much easier to cover if they're only 10 feet tall, requiring a more rural-style fence, pollinator-friendly grasses to create a natural habitat, improve pollinators in the area, and help with water runoff are all different factors that could, I think, really improve the ability for community solar to better integrate. So I'm just respectfully requesting that as a next step, in addition to looking at accessory use, that you also revisit bringing the community solar ordinance back with better restriction for your community.
I appreciate your comments. That's not obviously what we're discussing here tonight.
Yep.
However, I will tell you, from my personal standpoint, we've heard that before.
Okay.
And
I believe it.
yeah, and I was excited when I heard the folks saying that, and I'm like, yeah, we want to work with people. What ends up happening is we have in the past been sold something that is not reality, and from my own personal standpoint, before I would be interested in looking something like that, and I'm just speaking personally for myself, there would have to be some serious changes. And I'll be specific with you. The main thing is that what happens is we say, yeah, you've got to screen these things. And then they end up saying, well, we've got these poles that look like a spider web on top that are not owned by the solar people. Wow. They're owned by Excel, so they can put them wherever the heck they want, and they don't have to worry about screening. So we end up with this giant, whatever this thing is. Eyesore, thank you. Right in the middle of what we strive to protect as our view sheds, and we can't do anything about them. And this was never mentioned in any discussion.
In fact, multiples. I mean, I think the biggest problem is that some of them have 5 or 6 of these 75 foot
9 to 12
or 9 to 12,
poles,
yeah.
which has been a surprise. And
Yeah.
It's really, at a minimum, it seems like 3 per megawatt.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. and it's right in the middle of where we want to look. Specifically, the Zavrel mine one, you tell you what, you get on 97 during the daytime, drive to the end of it where it meets 95, and you'll see what I'm talking about. That's the best view in the county, and there's...
Over the river.
Yes, and there's these poles sticking up there now. It's ridiculous. And of course we wouldn't have allowed that had we known. I'm sorry, I'm speaking for myself. I would have voted against that had I known that that was going to be there. So, and that was never mentioned. And this was by people who are saying these exact same words that you're saying. So, like, I'm done. You know, until I get some honesty, and I don't know how, it's from my, and I'm just, again, just speaking my own personal opinion, I would not be for any further expansion of solar until there's some kind of guarantee that that would not happen. And I just don't see at this point how that could occur. So, that's
Well,
my opinion.
Is it okay if I respond
Sure,
to that? And
sure.
I feel bad that there were people that were creating somewhat of a bad name for solar, and I do not disagree with you that when they locate 9 to 12 of those poles, it looks like a small substation.
Mm-hmm.
I drive down 97 a lot. Actually, my grandparents live in Osceola, so I've seen that development occur. Every few months I come through and
Yep.
and I have commented that I don't think some of them have been done well.
Yeah.
So, you know, the only response to that I can have is that I still hope we can have a dialogue. There are better ways to do that. The program has also now changed. You cannot do more than 1 megawatt of solar, which does limit the number of poles.
Some
And
people
there
get
are
around
ways-
that by co-locating.
Not anymore. It's not allowed.
Can't do that anymore.
But your new ordinance could say the cap is 1 megawatt, which would prevent, let's say someone had applied 2 years ago when that was allowed, and for some reason they got an extension and they came to you with an application to co-locate and put in more poles. If your ordinance only allowed 1 megawatt per, you pick the appropriate range, that would prevent that. So I think there are ways to work around it, and I think we would just love the opportunity to work with the city to see if there's a way that we can come up with a better solution. And I feel bad that that was misrepresented by other solar developers. There are better ways to do this, and perhaps better locations for those gardens versus,
Sure.
right over the river. That is a beautiful view as you look over to Wisconsin. So I'm just hoping we get the opportunity to work with the city and see if there are conditions that could be put around this that would help better preserve the beauty of Scandia, in addition to having that solar generation, and property owners have the right to use some of their agricultural land for that.
Sure. Well, this is, again, not the time and place,
Nope.
and I don't know when that would be, but sure.
you.
Thanks.
And if I could just say one thing quick, if it helps, I'd like to find out a little bit more. I used to study solar in college and was involved in construction. So there's some questions I have that would be nice to get answers to. I do agree with Dan 100%, but this probably isn't going away. So if you have the time,
Absolutely. I'll
I'd
make
like to
sure
find out more.
Neil can
I'll get you
connect
his
us.
contact information.
okay, thanks, Dan.
Perfect. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thank you. And did you want to say something?
Pam Arnold, 16560 220th Street North. I am a huge proponent of solar, and I agree with you about the view shed issue that appeared, but obviously we've got Department of Transportation rules that we should have been on top of, but we weren't. Has nothing to do really with the solar installer, although I think that the liaisons to solar really need to inform communities about what the visual ramifications are going to be. But that said, my concern is because I am interested in installing solar on a farm, that this issue of screening solar actually would be extremely complex from the position of somebody installing solar, because exposure is what one needs when one installs solar. So these setback restrictions, berming, the other visual kind of amendments or conditions that you might want to require may actually prevent successful installation of solar, since there aren't very many places on a specific site where solar could be installed, ground-mounted solar, for instance.
Sure. Now, the screening requirements on this are only for First of all,
panels that are
they're,
within a right-of-way, a certain number of feet from a right-of-way.
actually, they're only for installations over 800 square feet, right? And only potentially. So the point here is that we're the reason we're asking for, or we're requiring a CUP for anything over 800 square feet is because we think that there's a possibility that it might be a problem. If it turns out that it's not, then I don't think we would require. We're not saying that you have to have screening for things over 800 square feet. For anything under 800 square feet, we're saying you can have an administrative permit and you're good to go.
Okay,
So, we're not limiting that at all.
okay.
And rooftop, it's actually like, go for it. And then ground mounted, it's, 800 square feet, and then after that, we're saying, we just want to take a look at it because we want to make sure that you're not impinging on the view, which I know you're sensitive to that too.
I'm very sensitive to it, but
yeah.
I think to a certain extent, the aesthetic of solar is something that we probably, if we're deciding as a community that we're in favor of,
We need to get over it.
being less impactful to the environment overall, and Scandia wants to be a leader in that particular,
Yeah.
then I think to a certain extent, there is another whole, arc of conversation around the zoning ordinance, which is, how do we start to see solar differently? How do we start to see the consequences of that, what we might consider to be an eyesore initially, to actually be a better solution than the alternative? And the alternative might be something that we can't see.
Sure.
For instance, we're not going to be in the Arctic National Refuge watching the drilling that goes on there, for instance, but most of us want polar bears. So
Right.
these are complex,
Right.
complex
Yeah,
conversations.
for
And
sure.
it isn't just about what this is going to look like.
Yeah,
Because we all know that something we didn't like once upon a time, like modern architecture,
we all like them.
we find
Yeah.
completely acceptable
Right.
now.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So thank you very much,
Yeah.
though, for taking the time to consider these issues, because it's all part of the growth, I think,
Sure,
of this
yeah.
wonderful thing. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Steve.
Steve Conmiller, 8616 West River Road. Wrong address. My old address. 13450 188th Street North.
Okay.
A couple questions about the ordinance. You talk about what it means to be an accessory use. Can I sell any of my electric to my neighbors?
It's not up to this commission to do that, that's Excel.
Under this ordinance?
Under this ordinance, well, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, in general, the only way you could sell, there's only two ways you could sell energy from your solar installation to your neighbors. One would be to run a wire from your solar power to their house, which, I guess, go ahead, I don't know. I don't know.
I just asked.
Or the other way is to sell it back to Excel,
Right.
which is completely allowed by this ordinance.
Okay.
That's the way most people do it.
It has
They
the
sell
word
to Excel.
primarily in there.
Right.
So I think if we were going to give a real strict definition of that, you'd say more than 50% of it should be going into your property. But if you are selling back to Excel or helping out a neighbor and it's not the primary use of it, then it probably would be permitted.
Yeah, I mean, you still have the 800 square foot limitation without a CUP, so
Right.
that's going to really limit what you could potentially provide to a neighbor. But I
Unless
think
you wanted to
at
get a
peak times, you are going to be
conditional
generating and going back to the grid or to a neighbor or someplace.
Okay.
And that's why we put a square footage in there instead of saying, you only need 10 watts, because in the future, 800 square feet could be 1,000 watts, who knows, and so you'd still be able to have
So
that.
essentially the answer is yes, I could.
You
Sure.
could, as long as it wasn't that you were installing one and all of it was
Being-
supporting your neighbor.
Okay, fair enough. The second, if I am putting one of these things in, and am I legally bound then to maintain, repair, and dispose of the system?
Don't we have,
It would only be, I think the nuisance ordinance would apply
That's what we
if
talked
this was
about,
an
yeah.
Right.
accessory
Yeah.
structure. So if it became unused, broken down, not in good repair, the city could use the nuisance ordinance to require you to either repair or remove it. The same way it would with other kinds of accessory structures that fall into disrepair.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Any other comments?
And then,
If you
Steve,
could come up
if
to
you
the podium.
quit using it for a year, probably if it was one with a CUP and you quit using it for more than a year, then you don't have the CUP anymore typically.
CUP
So it's
goes
like
away if it's
abandoned and then
farm.
you'd have to give up the use, so.
So you
there's
lose
an
your
alternate.
CUP. You
Yeah.
lose the CUP if you do.
Yeah, usually, and I can't remember what your ordinance says. Does it have that clause for conditional use permits? That
I think
if
it
the
is.
use
If it's not
is
utilized for a
discontinued
year.
for a year, then you lose the permit. So that would be kind of an ultimate if somebody really abandoned it.
Would that be the same for an administrative permit, though?
No, but
No.
then it would just be a nuisance ordinance. Then
Okay.
you have an
All right.
800 square foot structure, and if it was a mess and your neighbor complained, then Neil gets to enforce the nuisance ordinance.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. State your name
Yeah,
and address,
I'm
please.
sorry, I came late, I had car trouble.
That's okay.
Car got towed, and so I'm rather unprepared, and I'm,
If you could state your name and address. for the
yeah,
record,
Christopher
please.
Johnson, at 20360 Manning Trail North.
Thank you.
So, by big Marine Lake store, that area. And the question I just had is, because I'm coming in late and I'm not, is this for home solar systems? Basically what you're describing, 800 square feet, and it doesn't address solar gardens or solar farms, which I understand that Scandia has put a moratorium on or stopped altogether.
Yeah, it's not
Actually
more.
repealed.
Is that part of the question,
We've repealed.
that the planning
No.
commission, are they gonna address farms or gardens?
That's not part of this particular ordinance. We have addressed that recently, and we
Repealed.
repealed the ordinance.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
And so this is, because that ordinance also had the accessory solar use in it, we're having now to adopt this one in order to continue to allow people to have the accessory use and to have some standards for it. Because we didn't
Understood.
have a separate one before. So now that
Great.
the big ones are repealed,
Okay,
We're
well, thank
doing
you
this.
for clarifying that. And then, I
You know,
guess
I
the
think
FAR,
with regard to the community solar farms, I think if you look back at, the reasons it was repealed, I mean, there were a number of issues that I don't think we understood. I think the last one we talked, the last one that was approved, there was conversations about what is electromagnetic interference or frequencies. We had issues with, the screening. There were, there were always questions about impact on property values. And I think, some of the sense of the council, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, if I mistake or misspeak, is I think a lot of the sense of the council was there are just so many unknowns that if you sat there and had a moratorium has a fixed period while you're studying specific things. We might not know the answers within that period of time. So that's why the action was taken to repeal it as opposed to put a moratorium on it.
sure. So anybody wanting to do a farm or a solar garden in future will have to bring that up on a
I think that
case-by-case
will,
basis.
I think that ultimately, and we had this, you, as you said, you came late, but I think, Dan addressed it. I think that's something that the city will look at again in the future.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Any further comments? All right, we'll close the public discussion and bring it to the commission. Do you guys have any thoughts? Any changes based on our public discussion?
Well, the only thing I can say is that we look for a way to allow homeowners to have solar for primarily their use, and that's what this ordinance does. And so I don't have any problems with it at all.
I think everyone's as protected as they can be, that whether they're for it or against it, 800 square feet's a good size.
Seems to be big enough.
I think we're still being proactive in allowing residents to have solar and endorse that, just on a smaller scale.
well, and it's similar, I mean, if that footprint is similar to a two-car garage.
Yeah.
So it's a common size of accessory structures we let most people have. And so I think it's easy to allow that without a special permit, whereas if you start getting into bigger things that are sort of large pole barn size, then it's a much bigger impact potentially on neighbors. So at that point, you do the conditional use
And it's
permit.
not like we're saying no to that, we're saying conditional use permit.
Right. Yep.
Okay, a motion?
I'll move to approve the ordinance amending Chapter 2, Section 4.33 of the Development Code to regulate accessory solar energy systems in Chapter 1, Section 4.2 of the Development Code for related definitions.
A second.
All those, any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And thanks to Brenda for noticing that when we repealed the solar ordinance, all the definitions came out with it, and that we had, we had to put them back in.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Brenda. All right, so that moves us to our discussions, starting with the shoreland.
All right, so we're making progress with
All
this.
right.
We've been working on it for a while, but it's a major redo of your ordinance, so it's worth spending the time. Last time, some of the key things you did were to decide to use the city's definition of building height rather than the DNR's definition, because the city's is a bit more conservative at some building heights, that it would make a couple feet of difference. We recommended that duplexes be allowed in shoreland areas, and that water-oriented commercial uses could be permitted with a conditional use permit. You have decided that the lot sizes and width standards, when it goes to public hearing, will include both the current Scandia ones and the ones the DNR would permit, because the DNR would permit smaller lot sizes than your current ordinance, to get some feedback from the public on that issue. We made a couple more tweaks to the wetland setback issue and some other minor text changes. There is one change I made to the draft, and that's because I'm working on another shoreland ordinance, and the DNR advised us that they have revised their drawing that shows bluff definitions. And instead of just doing equal to or greater, equal to or less than, they've changed the sign to equal to or less than and equal to or greater than. Subtle difference, but it's there. So that's a new diagram in there that you have not seen. So tonight, the discussion would start with Section 8 of the ordinance, unless you guys have some questions about the parts we've been through so far.
I don't.
I don't either.
And so this section, this is one where Neil has had some concerns based on some projects that have come to the city where people had done land disturbance that is smaller than would typically require a grading type permit or a stormwater permit, but it impacted city facilities or it impacted neighbors.
You know, I think when you look at it, one of the concerns here is when, currently we basically refer to this, grading ordinance with regard to a permit. But when you look at the movement of, you can move up to 50 cubic yards of material. Mm-hmm. And, I think of 50 cubic yards on some of the smaller lots, that we have, that's filling 3,000 square feet, 5 inches deep. And you can do that without a permit.
Okay, that's kind of a lot, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
On a 10-acre
And-
parcel, it's not a big deal, but on some of
Right.
these little shoreland ones, it is a big deal.
Well, and especially, in the shoreline, and one of the incidents that I can recall specifically was it was in a shoreline area. It wasn't a lakefront lot, so the watershed district was less concerned, but it was something that kind of flowed through, and then if you followed the trail, ultimately, it would end up in Big Marine Lake.
Okay.
And, you get a heavy rain, and all of a sudden, you've got all this material that, number one, on and beyond filling up our ditch, is going through a culvert down into Big Marine Lake.
Okay.
I went out there with Jim Shaver, nothing we can do. I look at it, and, by area or quantity, it didn't require a permit.
Okay.
So you're sitting there, I don't like it, but, realistically, we have nothing to regulate it. And I just think within shoreland areas particularly, because virtually everything in a shoreland area is draining to, to that water body,
For sure.
that, perhaps the 50 cubic yards may be a little bit excessive.
Yeah, okay.
So a question would be, from your perspective, Neil, are there some different numbers, or are you thinking that any grading or filling on lots in shoreland should require a permit?
Even if it was down to where we have movement of 10 cubic yards on steep slopes, movement of, 10 cubic yards, and, realistically, that would be 3,000 square feet, 1 inch deep.
Right.
Something like that might be, a threshold, and I guess it's, what really constitutes, minor landscaping that you don't want to overregulate for.
Yeah.
But what really will have an impact.
Yeah. One of those kind of big dump trucks, the standard dump trucks, isn't that 3 yards?
Oh, no. They're more like 10.
Those are 10
Yeah.
yards? 10 yards, so that's one dump truck would be 10 yards, and right now we're saying 50 yards?
Mhm.
So that's 5 dump truck loads?
5 tandems.
That's a lot.
Especially on a small lot.
Yeah, seriously.
Totally agree with
5
that
dump
lot.
trucks?
Yeah, that's a lot. What if we did like a ratio per lot square footage? Does that get too complicated?
I don't know how you can, there's so many different situations, I don't know how we can
Yeah.
do that.
I mean, I agree with Neil that 50 cubic yards on a small lot,
Yes,
it's a big deal. But on a big lot, it doesn't matter.
or even 50 cubic yards on a small lot done a particular way is a lot different than if you cover the whole lot,
Right.
Right,
you know?
right.
I mean, you could build your own bluff if you want.
I mean, it'd be like area versus volume would come into point.
You got anything
But if you have
else?
short, if you have ice damage, you may get into at least 10 cubic yards.
If you have ice damage on your shoreline?
Yeah, and you want to fix it,
Mhm.
Yeah, it wouldn't be tough to do a dump truck load of repair.
not at all.
See, but a lot of it is, the question is when do you need a permit and when don't you need a permit?
Well, if you're
Because
dumping
if you had a
dump truck
threshold
load-
in that instance, where somebody's repairing the shoreline, our engineer would sit there and have certain requirements, and then he'd also, at the same time, probably trigger the watershed district. But there are some things that are outside of the watershed district's threshold that if it doesn't require a conditional use permit or a variance, they are not as active
Okay.
in those situations.
In one of the communities where I work, the stormwater regulation is that within the St. Croix Riverway, if you grade 10 is the number they use, 10, more than 10 cubic yards, or disturb more than 600 square feet, you need a permit.
That it would be, I think, far superior to what we have and would probably at least allow us to, have some sort of review of those.
Yeah. And I don't know how they pick those numbers, but that's what they use in the St. Croix district. And it seems kind of fair to me. 10 is like one dump truck load, and I can imagine probably somebody could deal with that on a site and not push too much stormwater onto the other. And then the other caveat they have is if you disturb drainage onto an adjacent parcel, you have to get a permit. That whatever drainage you're changing has to stay within your property. You can't even do a little bit of fill or whatever if it's going to change the drainage on another parcel.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. If you're the other guy.
Yeah, especially if you're the other guy, yeah.
So we could try out those standards. 600 square feet is like less than a 2-car garage,
Yeah,
That's
right.
not very much.
It isn't very much.
No.
But that's without a permit.
Right.
And it's one dump truck load, so you could get one dump truck to come and dump. Still, one dump truck's a
As long
lot.
as I dumped it within that 600 square feet,
Well, right,
you
right,
know.
yeah.
And another caveat you can do in shoreland is to say no disturbance within the shore impact zone, which
Yeah.
is half the distance between the ordinary high water level and the required structure setback. So on Big Marine, for instance, the setback is 100 feet. So you could not do any kind of grading, filling, or disturbance within 50 feet from the ordinary high.
And that's why I'm getting back to the ice damage. You got ice heave, and we want to fix it. According to our ordinance now, you couldn't do it. 'Cause it
You mean
didn't-
according to what she's saying?
Yeah, because of
Yeah,
the,
yeah, according to our ordinance now, you could, because right now we have 50 cubic yards.
You're talking about within the 50-foot,
Does our current ordinance?
I think it
have any-
prohibits any change within the shore
Within
impact.
the
Yeah,
shore
I think
impact
so
zone?
too.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it'd
Without
be
a
hard
permit.
for us to get the DNR to allow a change to that. That's pretty much a statewide.
That seems
reg.
like that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean,
You can talk to them about riprap or, some kinds of shoreline repair, but you need to get a DNR permit for that, particularly if it's below the ordinary high.
So every year that ice heave pushes a mountain this high, you can't do anything about it unless you get a permit.
aren't you allowed to remove it? Isn't a lot of it weeds?
You
and-
can't do any grading within the impact,
Within the impact zone.
and that's in the
Without a
top of the
permit.
impact.
but that's one of the issues of living on a lake. You get to live on a lake, but you also have to deal with getting a permit if you want to disturb the land around the lake. Because the lake's not just yours, it's everybody's.
The ice disturbed it, I'm trying to fix it.
Well, right. No, the ice disturbed it, right. But we're saying that you have to get a permit in order to go messing around in that very sensitive area. That
Now,
makes sense
that's
to
your
me.
current ordinance.
That's
Right.
Now, what the DNR has proposed in the revised ordinance is that you could move up to 10 cubic yards on steep slopes or within that shore impact zone without a permit. The new ordinance is a little more liberal than the current Scandia ordinance and the old model shoreland ordinance, because it does allow up to 10 cubic yards of greater fill.
Why in an era when we're trying to protect lakes more, are they getting more liberal?
I think it's because of the kind of thing Tom is talking about.
Because they went too far the other way.
Because there are times when it makes some sense for somebody to be able to do a little bit of work in that area. That would be my guess, but I don't know, I'd have to ask them why they changed it.
I kind of like Greg's idea about that. I mean, a dump truck load of dirt and a lot in the Bliss Edition, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, a lot, so, I don't know, it seems like if there was a way to do it proportionate to the size of the lot.
So that if it's on an acre or less,
Well, they're all way under an acre, yeah, so.
so then are you thinking half a dump truck?
Something on that order, I suppose. I don't know the specifics, but it seems to make more sense.
Well, and that's where going back to the 600 feet. You take one of those lots, 600 feet is what, most of those are 11, 12,000 square feet. So, I mean, that's a pretty small percentage of the lot. So I think, the standard that Sherry referenced, 10 yards or 600 square feet, would make sense.
Even within the shoreline impact zone?
No, it's gotta be out of that.
No,
Out of the-
within.
Well, the DNR's new model ordinance would allow that within, that level within the shore impact zone.
The 600,
The current Scandia ordinance and the old model ordinance did not allow any grading or fill in the shore impact zone.
okay, got it.
Without a permit.
Without a
You can still
permit.
get a permit and do it.
Yeah, you'd have to actually get a variance is what you'd have to.
Oh, you have to get a variance? Oh, that's kind of serious.
So it's pretty serious. I don't think we've ever given a variance for that, actually. So I think that's why the
It's-
DNR made the exception, is that it was just so hard, and there were situations, David Jessup's was one on Big Marine Lake, where the DNR actually did finally give him a permit because it just made sense, given the ice damage on his property, to let him do some repairs.
I feel like it makes sense to be able to fix repairs. However, I think it should be done right. Because like, so I don't own a lake property, I don't really know anything about lake property. What if I go out and buy a lake property, I get this big mound in the spring or in the winter, whatever this happens, and I take my shovel out there and shovel it into the lake? Who's stopping me from doing that as long as I'm under 600 square feet?
Actually, the DNR would, because you cannot fill below the ordinary high without a DNR permit.
Or doing,
So-
or doing it else
grade.
wrong?
I mean, you can't do anything below the ordinary high without a DNR permit. And that's not part of
Okay.
our ordinance, that's, you know, a statewide permitting sort of thing.
Okay, so this ice damage thing is not part of this discussion then? Because you can't do anything about the ice damage.
Well, unless it's pushing stuff up above the ordinary high,
But
Which it does.
which it does.
it does.
Yeah.
It goes that far.
Oh, yeah. Could be as high as this table,
But
right?
the new DNR proposal is to allow 10 cubic yards.
10 cubic yards within, up to 10
Would-
cubic yards.
Would that satisfy the
I
ice
think that
dam?
would, I think they would
Permit?
help. I think that would do a lot. Because right down to nothing's permitted.
And nobody could go in and remove that ice dam mound and put in a retaining wall.
If the retaining wall went below the ordinary high water level, they would have to get a DNR permit.
So the DNR kind of trumps everything in that 50-foot impact zone, right?
They trump everything below the ordinary high water level,
Okay.
Which
But
is pretty
outs-
much right at the lake.
right at the lake line.
Yeah,
Or out into it.
yeah.
So you can't build yourself a sand beach out, fill into the, past the ordinary high water level and build yourself a sand beach.
Yeah, actually, yes, you can.
Can you?
Yeah.
But don't you
There's
have to get a permit?
There's a DNR permit for it.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
permit, but I mean, without a permit, you couldn't
Right.
just haul in a couple truckloads of sand and create yourself a beach, you'd have to get a permit. Or if you wanted to build a rock retaining wall below the ordinary high, you'd need to get a permit.
So the DNR's proposal of 10 cubic yards would help.
Well, their
That ice
proposal is
dam.
50.
Theirs is 10.
Theirs is 10, okay.
10 cubic yards on steep slopes or within the shore or bluff impact zones. If you move more than that, you need to get a permit. So they would allow you to do some work in that area between the ordinary high and about 50 feet back. They'd let you do some work, but a limited amount without a permit, 10 cubic yards. And then after that point, you'd need a permit.
And we're talking about a 10 cubic yard, 6,000 square foot.
For
600.
anything in shoreland.
For anything in shoreline.
Yeah.
Okay,
600.
so let me,
600 square feet.
let me give you just this scenario. Your neighbor goes out, he can do up to 600 square feet. So he goes out with his tractor and cuts the sod off 600 square feet just for grins, right kind of near the lake in kind of a swale area, just cuts the sod off and moves it. And then it rains. And it washes, the water happens to run right through that area, and it washes all the dirt that was underneath that sod into the lake and muddies up your beach.
He could do that now.
He can do that now.
It's what he can't do is grading and filling.
But isn't that grading? I'm
Not
talking
to
about
take-
I'm talking about taking the sod, taking some dirt with it. you
Oh,
know?
okay. So
So,
if he's,
I'm
yeah,
just-
if he's
I'm
actually
just-
changing the contours. then
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right.
it makes a little swale right there for some crazy reason. And this is within the shore impact zone. And so all of a sudden now you've got, this exposed area, and, because he did it wrong, he didn't know what he was doing. I'm not saying you're conscientious.
Probably our vegetation management said he couldn't do that.
Who said that? Who what?
In the same ordinance, vegetation management.
Says he can't do that. Okay. All right, I'm just trying to say, I don't think it's a good idea to be going around, letting, I mean, I don't live on lakes, so I don't know the problems.
And my point is that you shouldn't have to need a permit for some of
Minor.
this stuff. I mean,
For a minor repair, and would
you
you?
get permits. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
No, I think you should be able to fix your ice dam berm, but in the same token, should you be responsible to put up silt fence?
Oh, I think so.
If like in Dan's, you know,
If
story,
you
where
remove vegetation and
if it fell
you
within
gotta take care
our
of the silt.
600 square feet, 10 cubic yard scenario, does the homeowner still have to put up silt fence?
Not if he doesn't get a permit.
So let's see what
So that
intensive, if
could be a
intensive
problem.
vegetation clearing includes just grass.
Because I can see somebody remodeling their house, ripping up the backyard, it's exposed soil, there's no silt fence, it's running into the lake, and screwing up Tom's Beach or
Right.
whose ever beach.
Or one person
Yeah.
does that and it's fine, but, you know, how many people live on Big Marine? A lot.
So in the ordinance, we prohibit intensive vegetation clearing.
Okay,
And that's defined as the complete removal of trees or shrubs in a continuous patch, strip, row, or block.
okay.
If you wanted to make that a little tougher and account for people completely stripping vegetation off the soil, we could add a complete removal of vegetation in a continuous patch, strip, row, or block. And that would mean then that it would be prohibited for someone to do the kind of clearing that you described.
Or could they do it with proper
With the
erosion
permit.
control?
Yeah, with erosion control or plan.
And
But
that's
no-
what would be required if you had a grading permit.
But if
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
didn't,
Then you,
That
yeah,
one.
if you got a grading permit, then you could do it, and if you did a grading permit, someone would be looking to see what you were doing for erosion control and.
but if it fell at 599 square feet, can we still require them to put in erosion control if they're not getting a permit?
No,
No.
there's no way you're
We have
getting
no basis
erosion
for it.
control without a
Yeah, we
permit.
don't.
There's
Right.
no way.
So we can't really control that.
It comes down to a point of how much regulation do you think we should be doing?
Well, I like less is better, but
Yeah, less
Yeah,
is
that's-
better. I totally get, I'm on board with that, but I'm also like, I'm aware of the fact that there are a lot of people out there who don't take responsibility for stuff, and, you know, I think we need to have a little teeth to say, you need to take responsibility for this.
so if we go
I
with
mean, I don't know, I
this,
don't live
if
on
we
a
go
lake,
with,
I don't know.
I don't either, but if we go with the 610 cubic yards and no permits required, you know, we're gonna be giving that much.
Is that,
I don't know if that'll be a
is
problem or
that
not.
too much? I don't either. I'm not in.
What do you think, Neil? I
Yeah.
mean, you see a lot of these.
And, you know, I think one of the issues is a lot occurs without us seeing them,
Sure, yeah,
more so than, you know, what occurs with us seeing them,
yeah, yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, that's just reality.
That's reality, yeah. But I know there are enough instances, you know, where, you know, we have had complaints, and I mean, in some of these, the more of the complaints that I've gotten are within shoreline district, but are not directly impacting the lake. But I mean, obviously you have a system, and ultimately, you know, any disturbed soils will end up in the lake or in a wetland or, you know, some other water resource.
Why do we think the DNR changed?
My guess, I'd be only making a guess here, but my guess is they found that there were times when homeowners needed to do a little bit of work within that shore impact zone. And it probably related to things like ice dams. And that they just decided to allow a minimal amount of work. That they probably had so many complaints from people that they couldn't do anything, that they decided to not allow a minimum amount. You have to think of them as a statewide agency, and all the lakeshore owners they're dealing with around the state. And I think there's a point where they just decided a little bit would be tolerable.
Can we say that, I mean, can we say that you can do a little bit, but you have to get an administrative permit, and that administrative permit's got a list of all the different things you have to do, like you have to
You
do
would probably
self-fencing,
get
and you
a
have to
regular
do.
permit, because typically we would have it, Ryan review it. So I would, that would be more typical that our engineer would review it, who would look at the drainage patterns and whatnot with conditions.
And that
So
starts to run into money now, right?
starts running into money where there's an escrow deposit, just it's what it costs for a grading permit.
Right, right. Which is what, like $500 or?
$400 is the application fee for grading permit.
Oh, wow, okay, it's expensive. Yeah, that's not cool.
With the escrow, so all those
Okay.
costs for Brian, for our engineer, are billed
Okay.
back to the applicant,
Okay.
which can run up to $400.
Well, what do you think? I mean, I'm kind of,
I'm willing to, I'd rather go with the 10 cubic yards and put the condition of 600 square feet. Then we're limited in a two-way specific area as well. There'll be less landscape exposed with 600 square feet.
Yeah.
There is I think we approved a variance last time for a home in the Bliss Edition. And that whole front yard, as far as I was concerned, would have to be graded. Because it was actually lower, it was like a saucer.
Mhm.
So now, and I believe, like we said, well, they get that with a grading permit or whatever.
Right.
Now, and that was within the shore impact zone, a lot of it.
Mhm.
So
But that was
It was a variance.
variance.
that was a variance.
Yeah, so we.
granted that.
Yeah, because
Well,
there
we
was no
granted
way
it.
to build on the parcel without
Yeah.
it. We pushed them back as far as we could.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that required them to do, I mean, well, I don't know, did that require a grading permit?
Yes, it did.
It
As
did
part of
require a
that
grading.
variance, they were required to give a grading plan for Ryan to review and
Yeah.
approve.
Okay.
Yeah, and a part of those, I mean, because I think there's language in our code that talks about that if the grading, if the site plan and all that is submitted as part of the building permit, they don't need a separate grading permit.
Right.
We don't necessarily layer these things on top of each other.
As part of it.
And that's true in here too. If someone is doing as part of getting a regular building permit, then it's looked at as a part of the building permit.
Yeah, okay.
So shall we float
Well-
with the 10 cubic yards and a maximum of 600 square feet for the public hearing and see what kind of comments you get?
Sure.
And also then with the caveat that if anything you do disturbs drainage onto a neighboring property, then you need to get a permit.
Do we want to also have drainage into the lake?
Or we could say
Within
on
that
other
600.
properties or into the lake, that would work fine.
Because that would address your concern of,
And that, actually,
You're gonna
the
have drainage into the lake if you're working on the lake shore.
if you're changing the drainage into the lake,
yeah.
I think
Well,
is
he's
what
right
it
though, I
is.
mean, it's all drained to
If
the
you remove
lake.
that ice,
Yeah.
if you remove that ice dam, you're gonna have drainage into the lake.
Yeah.
Right, that should be conditioned.
Okay, so impacts onto the neighboring properties. I think in the other ordinance I'm thinking about, there's also a caveat that if the city decides that it's impacting a significant natural resource, the city can also require a permit. So I suppose that would be a situation where if it felt like it was impacting the lake in a big way. It's a discretionary thing that I'm actually a little uncomfortable with because it allows a lot of latitude, but.
So based on what you just said, if somebody was doing some work on their lake shore and their neighbor complained about it, Neil could go out there and take a look, and if he felt that it was having an impact on the lake, then he could require. them to get
Or
it.
like on a remnant natural community or a very high quality something or other,
He could
then
require it.
the city could also require a permit in that case and make them do some kind of erosion control. So I can borrow that language from
Yeah, I think
Baytown
that'd be
and the Middle
appropriate.
St. Croix, and we'll just insert that and see what people think. How's
Yeah,
that?
okay.
All right, so that's most of, I think.
Could
what-
is there a way to add in, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Is there a way to add in like some language for the public discussion? Just to make, I just want to make sure that we end up talking about the idea that that all of this stuff would require a permit.
Sure,
You know, as an alternative to not requiring a permit.
yeah.
You mean the 610?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
would require
let's
a
bring it up at the public hearing so the public can weigh in.
So we could have a way of saying to the public, this is what would require a permit, this is what wouldn't, and this is what's a change from
Yeah,
current.
yeah.
And a permit would cost you,
And a permit would cost
A
you.
grading permit would cost you $400.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, they ought to know that too.
yeah, that's an
Sure.
important consideration.
Yeah.
I mean, $400 is a lot of money.
Okay, so I think that's the big question for that section was what were our thresholds going to be for permits? Otherwise, there's a section here that is the stormwater management one is consistent with your development code, and it says things need to meet the requirements of the code and also the requirements of the local watershed district. And we probably don't have to have a lot more specific standards in here other than saying they have to meet city and watershed standards. I don't see a reason for putting a long list of things in here unless you do. Section 9 then too is the subdivision provision. The DNR has a ton of stuff in there. I think we just take that out and say subdivisions, lot consolidations, lot line adjustments, or platting comply with the Scandia's subdivision ordinance.
Yeah.
I don't know why
Yeah.
we'd have anything different
Yeah, that
in
makes sense.
shoreland.
Yeah.
So that'll be a nice clean section. The last section that's a big item is the planned unit development section, section 10. And I borrowed what I can from the code, for example, that the application would follow the application procedure for PUDs in the Scandia development code, to not have to put in all that stuff about applications. They do have to have a homeowners association for a PUD. That's one of the DNR's requirements. And there need to be some deed restrictions, covenants, and easements that address future vegetative or topographic alterations, beaching of watercraft, construction of any commercial buildings within residential PUDs, and that ensure the long-term preservation and maintenance of open space. So those are that's a different thing in the shoreland piece than in the regular PUD ordinance. Isn't this requirement for the preservation of some open space. And that becomes important in the next section, which is the one where we start to think about density in planned unit developments. And this is how developers can get creative with a subdivision in a shoreland area with the idea of protecting the stuff kind of closest to the lake or of highest ecological value, but then allowing higher densities on other parts of the PUD. And so what the DNR has done is to create something they call tiers. So on recreational development lakes, for example, each tier is 267 feet deep. Don't ask me where they got that number. On natural environment lakes with no sewer, the tiers are 400 feet deep. On rivers, they're 300 feet deep. And so the first thing you do is you create your tiers, and then on each of those tiers, you determine what would be the maximum number of single residential lots you could do in that tier based on the densities that are allowed in that tier. It's very complicated. I don't have an example for you. I think T-Gobble was one, right, where they did the tier thing. So if you're familiar with T-Gobble, that's the result of this kind of tier analysis, that you end up dedicating at least 50%, I believe it's 50% of the total project area, and it has to include things like wetlands that are not suitable for development, any kind of historic sites, the shore impact zone, and most of the shore impact zone, those have to be protected, and then you can create higher densities in those tiers going back. And I think the big question for you guys, since I can't imagine we want to go through this and try to change any of the DNR's numbers, because we'd go out of our mind, is just, do you feel like you're willing to allow PUDs in the shoreland district? Do we want to include this section in the ordinance?
So what you're saying is that by protecting these, or developing these tiers and then protecting areas within those tiers, that we can allow then, or that can be allowed, we have greater density than we have with just single family.
Right,
Is that correct?
yeah. So I can't remember in T-Gabo, are some of them like 1 acre lots?
Like most of them are 1 acre lots.
I think, yeah, maybe acre and a half. Yeah,
I
they're
mean,
a lot
they couldn't go
smaller.
beyond 1 acre probably if they have on-site septic, but,
They don't.
and the PUD ordinance also wants people to use community septic systems. That's another part of that, increasing the density. But that's the deal, is that instead of using the minimum lot size you typically would in that zoning district or in that shoreland district, as long as you protect 50% of the shore impact zone and some other kinds of things like historic structures, then you can develop more densely, particularly on the tiers as you get farther away from the lake.
50% of the shore impact zone,
Yeah,
but then a shore impact zone is 267 feet?
Well,
Or
in the
it's
case
tier
of
one.
yeah,
Is it tier one?
just in the
That's
case of
tier
this
one.
planned unit development, she's referring. You're not talking about the shore impact zone.
and for new residential PUDs, you have to protect 70% of the shore impact zone.
Is that shore impact zone different than what we're been talking about?
No, it's that 50-foot back,
50
like
feet.
on Big Marine, it's 50 feet back.
Right.
On a natural environment lake, it would be 100 feet back, because they have a 200-foot setback.
And now we're saying we don't have to protect the entire shoreline
No,
impact zone?
no, because they
That's leaving
would,
it in its natural state.
Huh?
That's, the 70% is leaving it in its natural state.
Oh,
So 30% could be disturbed.
As opposed to
Yeah.
changing it to a
because they would
beach.
let you put a marina on the lake, you know, have some kinds of recreational stuff next to the lake. But on a new PUD, 70% of that shore impact area has to be permanently protected.
so that would even mean you couldn't even mow it? You couldn't cut grass in it, is that
And
right?
that 70%, yes, if I'm reading this, I mean,
I mean, 30% of it could cut grass on, the other 70 you gotta leave alone. Is that right?
yep.
Yeah, I think
Portions of the
that's
shore
correct.
impact zone preserved in its natural or existing state.
Okay.
So if
that's-
it's grass now, it can, you can mow it and it stays grass. But if it's not grass now, it stays in its existing state.
Yeah. So they're saying you have to protect it, but they're saying if it's in grass now, or if it's in forest now, or whatever, they're not gonna make you change all of that land cover. They're not gonna make you restore prairie or whatever was there before.
No, but most undeveloped areas, it's not
woods.
maintained anyway.
Yeah, it's mostly
Begin with.
woodland.
Right.
So you can't maintain. And I'm not speaking for or against that, I'm just trying to just clear in my mind what it is.
So probably, I mean, a good example maybe, Tigavo, if you go by where the, like the parking areas, the marina and the common area there where you have access to the lake, that would be, I don't know if that's 30% of their frontage or the shoreline impact zone, but, start doing that calculation. That in a PUD, would you, they're saying 30% of that could be utilized. So, I mean, just, think about driving through there and, I don't know what that would represent in total shoreline impact, but, you go along where people
Right.
live and back in there, and so I think
It's a
that's the
lot
intent
less
is,
than 30% of T-Gabo,
Yeah.
a lot less.
but I think that's probably the intent, that you can group people more densely, but in
More
exchange,
area.
you give them a certain amount of open area to,
Yeah.
enjoy being on the lake.
Yeah. Could you pull up a picture of Tigavo, like an overhead?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if we can even see it, maybe it's
May
too
take
many
a minute.
trees, but.
But, oops, I got too many things open. Yeah.
So with a normal residence, they can, it's just a normal single-family home, they can impact the shore, the entire thing, right?
They can change,
I mean,
they can cut some vegetation. There's a limit in terms of those big trees that you can cut.
Sure.
But you can change some of the vegetation. On the shore impact zone right now, as our ordinance is, you cannot change the grade, you can't change grading. We're now saying that you can do a limited amount of it. So yes, current owners can do some things within that property that they own. The deal with the PUD is the developer is getting a benefit of being able to have this higher density. It's like a cluster development ordinance. In order to get that benefit of the higher density, he's having to put some things into protected areas, or concentrating all the boat docks into a
One
marina.
areas, as
Instead of
opposed to
everybody
spreading it out.
having one around that lake, you
Yeah.
have to focus it.
And in exchange for that, so basically what we're doing is we're exchanging, saving shoreland in exchange for allowing them to build more houses in a smaller area,
Off the lake.
off the
For-
lake.
yeah.
Yeah, but do we still have to meet the 4/40 guideline, or is that not, in this case?
That's a question for you. The DNR's ordinance allows higher density than the underlying zoning ordinance.
Okay,
Your current PUD ordinance does not.
okay.
And so the question for you is, within shoreland PUDs, are you willing to allow that density bonus that the DNR is willing to allow, even though you don't in your other PUDs?
So if you go to,
There's a marina.
you know, there's a marina, if you sat there and said, you know, you go back 50 feet gives you, hang on.
So theirs is less than 30 that they've developed.
Well, especially when you consider that there's a huge chunk of it that actually abuts the main lake. I mean, you're not seeing anywhere near the total shoreline of Tejano right there.
Yeah, that's the part that's cleared, but then you've
Yeah,
got,
see, this is all,
you know, from
property
here
in there too, so.
Mhm.
all the way around through
There, the place,
here, probably here,
yeah.
or depending.
That'll be scout camp after a while.
And some of that was wetland, so I don't think they could disturb it.
They couldn't do it anyways.
Yeah, they couldn't have,
Yeah.
some of that, even though, besides being in shore impact zone, there's some big wetlands around there that they could not have altered. But that's what this is driving toward, this idea of the PUD, is protecting the stuff closest to the lake, concentrating the recreational use, having it be sort of a common use among the landowners, and then giving the developer a bonus further back from the lake, especially like in the third and fourth tiers, so they can create more units.
Do we know how many acres Tegabo was totally?
God, I can't remember.
I've got their website up right here.
It's a little-
156 acres.
Yeah.
And 156, and they've got, what, 30,
28.
28 building sites?
28
planted
buildings.
right now.
Huh?
28 planted right now.
Yeah.
Second phase hasn't been planted.
Oh, so there's gonna be, there
There
could
could-
They could
potentially be
have
a
more,
lot
yeah,
more.
I
There were
think,
plans.
yeah, I
That
think it
upper
only
row
went
was
to
the
about
second
30,
phase.
32 or 34 though.
Yeah.
This
That's the
road
second
does
phase.
not exist today.
Okay,
That's phase two.
okay.
There are technically no lakeshore lots, because all of that is common ground, and the homeowners don't own it, they can't maintain it. It's all delineated.
Yeah, it's the association.
Okay.
So if you like this idea, if you think on some of the big chunks that are left on your lakes, because like on Big Marine, there are a couple big chunks left, I think, that you would give someone a reward for doing this rather than splitting the whole thing up into standard size lots. Then we want to include the PUD thing, and we also want to include the fact that they can get a density bonus for shoreline PUDs.
Well, I think the other thing in there is when we were looking at uses, you know, one of the things that we talked about as being a conditional use was a water-dependent commercial when it's included in a residential PUD. So if you're gonna have water-dependent commercial, and some of that was marina, restaurant, or whatnot, you're gonna have to do something.
Yeah. I don't know how you guys, what you guys were thinking, but I like the idea of having a PUD and allowing some density, especially if it's gonna limit impact on the lake. I think it's a good idea to develop with community septic systems, which is encouraged in this ordinance, or in the PUD, or the normal PUD ordinance. I think it's a good way to develop, actually.
Well, I certainly think it's preferable to having 150-foot wide lots by 700 feet deep,
Yeah.
and everybody having a 700-foot driveway or
Yeah.
600-foot driveway coming in.
Yeah, right.
That makes
The
no
overall,
sense.
yeah.
That makes no sense at all to me.
Yeah.
Not a bit.
Yeah. But that's how things end up being developed if you,
If we
Everybody-
stay by according to our ordinance
yeah,
now.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Is there an opportunity for comment here?
Not really. This is just discussion. The public hearing on this will be, after we are done with our discussion, we'll have a public hearing probably next month or something.
Okay. Thank you.
I like the concept.
Yeah, you're a builder, yeah.
I was a builder, but, yeah, I mean, there's always, the carrot, you want to get more density up because you can increase your profit.
And that's good for a lot of things, and if we can have a little, it's good for, far be it for me to think of it this way, but it's good for the tax base to have a little bit more density. And having more people want access to the lake, and if you can do that without creating too much impact on the lake by pushing them back off. And
The other thing it does,
Saving
and
that.
when we've looked at cluster ordinances in other communities, one comment that people who live in those communities say that they like is that they can have a smaller lot. They don't have all the maintenance
yeah,
of the 10-acre lot, but they
Yeah.
still have access to some big natural
Yeah.
areas.
Put trails in
And
it.
for a lot of people now, that's preferable to having their own 5 or 10-acre lot
Yeah.
that they
Yeah.
need to maintain. It's a sort of lifestyle option
Mhm.
that Scandia can offer to people, which for a lot of folks, it is attractive.
yeah.
That's exactly why I'm opposed to 2.5 acres on the lake for single family. Because it's huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, I think the trend is,
it's
What we're talking
definitely
about.
to that. yeah.
Well,
And a
this is
PUD,
sure.
and a PUD allows you to be much more creative, I think, and use the land much better than if you limit it to 2.5 acres, 150 foot wide on the lake.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so we'll leave that section in
Yeah.
and leave in the idea of the density bonus for
Yeah.
PUDs in Lake Shore and put it out for public hearing that way and see what kind of comments we get.
Yeah.
I
And
think we
maybe
do.
we'll make sure we have some pictures of T-Gavo at the public hearing, so if people aren't familiar with it, we could show them what that would be.
I do
Yeah.
think we need something that says, for instance, tier 1 would be this big, tier 2 would be this, and we can allow such here.
With color coding or
Yeah.
something, yeah.
And there are those, the DNR has put some of those examples together, so we could get some to put up at a public hearing.
Because it is complex, they go through this
Yeah.
thing, wait a minute.
well, it's new terms too, tier 1, tier 2,
Yeah.
tier 3.
Yeah, it's a whole
I think
different,
people would be like, what?
After
Yeah.
just talking about shoreline, ordinary high water and shoreline impact and
yeah. we should-
PUD.
setback.
So now I think we're pretty much through the ordinance. Are you guys okay with what we got here? Ready to put it out for a public hearing at some point?
Are you good, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I like it, I think it's good.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Wherever you feel
Alright.
comfortable.
Good.
You can sit, stand.
So,
All right.
what do you
that puts
think,
that
Neil?
to
Public
bed for now?
hearing next up?
Next time.
And make it, do we make an effort to get this out to the lake associations a little bit early and let them know it's
I
coming?
think you should.
Probably, yeah.
So I'll kind of whip up the last changes and maybe you guys can figure out how to send a letter out to them and get a copy out to them and let them know about it. Because I would like those guys to have a little more time to look at it.
Yeah, that's a great
Yep.
idea. Yeah.
And you do give them some time, but there's a lot of people that are in Arizona or Florida this time of year.
That's a good point.
Well, I think that's a question. Do you want to do the public hearing in February or would it be better to hold off until March, given the snowbird thing?
That, and the meeting in February is on the second Tuesday.
Yeah,
It's not
I saw
on the
that, I
first
saw it.
Tuesday.
So if it's on the second Tuesday, we couldn't actually take action by the council because you need 10 days.
Right.
So
maybe it's better to
off
wait
just
till
going for
March
March.
Yeah,
with this.
I
okay.
think so.
Is that, the snowbirds though aren't gonna be back by March, are they?
Depends on-
Some of them will, at least they got a chance. I mean,
Okay.
the longer review period you have, the better chance you have of
Okay.
reaching people.
Sure.
I would wait till after Easter.
When's Easter?
I will find out.
April 1st.
April 1st?
April 1st. After Easter. People don't come back until after Easter.
What's the first Tuesday in April?
Probably the second, or, because if Easter's.
Oh, Easter's on a Sunday, it would be
Yeah,
the
it'd be the third.
It'd be the third.
It'd be the third, okay.
So we could do it
Is
in
that-
April.
Can we do it in April? Sure.
Deduction.
Right.
We're gonna forget about it, but
No, we won't.
we spent the last 6 months
Yeah.
working on it.
Here, I got it in dark.
Something
My
like
little
that.
dark, thing here.
All right. So that brings us to the comprehensive plan.
Jane, you can either stand, sit, wherever you're comfortable. As a matter of fact, you can probably even control.
Thank
I think my mouse will work.
Do I turn the lights on?
Oh, sure.
Turn the lights on.
I'm gonna move this back a little that way.
All right. Thank you for having me tonight. We're here to just briefly talk about the first phases of the first chapters of the.
I'm sorry, but you are actually blocking our view of the screen.
Do you want to move over here? Oh, by the projector?
Oh, yeah, we
Move
can.
by the projector.
Behind
Yeah, you can.
Behind it.
Thank you.
We can move easier.
Well, or, yeah, she could just,
What if I might be too far away?
Oh, from
Here, I'll go next.
All right. So I apologize if some of you have seen this before, but I know some haven't, and I thought I'd just go briefly, really quickly, what is a comprehensive plan, and it's actually the framework for the city for the next 20 to 30 years. It includes goals and policies, usually for the physical development of the city, and it's intended as a growth management guide. It also provides a legal basis for the very things Sherry has been talking about this evening, the zoning ordinances. If you want to go to the next slide, Neil. Why we're doing this now is under state statute, the plan has to be updated every 10 years. So we are in our 10-year cycle. The last plan was adopted in 2008. This plan has to be submitted to the Metropolitan Council by December 31st of 2018. But more than that, it's an opportunity to really take a look at things and reprioritize goals.
Doesn't it be approved by them? Don't we have to submit it to them by like July 1, 18?
Nope, we have to submit it to them by December 31st, and then there's a timeline for which they can review it. We have to submit it to put it out for adjacent community review. They have 6 months to review it, so we'll want to have that out by June for sure, at the latest. So just a little bit about the process we've been through. We actually started this about a year ago. We put up a website in January of 2017 that we've kept up to date with meeting minutes, various meeting handouts as we go. We had 2 pop-up meetings, one at Winterfest in January of 2017 and a second at Taco Days in that September, I believe. We also had 3 focus groups. We met with youth, business and agricultural owners, and then a 55-plus group. We had 10 to 12 members in each group. They met in June of 2017. The youth, we actually met with school-age kids at the school, 5th and 6th graders at the school. We also had a steering committee meeting that met over 3 times, starting in March and through August of 2017, where there were 11 members of the steering committee. They were very committed and very helpful, did a lot of work on this. We sent out a community-wide survey was sent out in June of 2017. It went out to every, and Neil will have to correct me, but I think every address in the city.
Every address in the city.
We did receive 391 responses. And then following all that process, we had some draft things we wanted to talk to the council about, so we met with the city council in October. And then after getting some direction from the council, there was a public open house on the October 24th to talk about goals, future land use, parks, and just the general plan. Tonight, we're going to talk, so we've been working on now writing the actual plan and putting it together. Tonight, we're going to talk about the land use chapters, the housing element, and the parks and recreation element. There are a number of elements to the plan, including water resources, transportation, implementation. We'll talk about those at another day. One of the things we tried to keep in mind as we began to draft the plan, these were the common themes that emerged throughout the public participation that we did. The Scandia's strengths, our rural open space and its history. The weaknesses, internet service came up time and time and time again. Some transportation issues, as well as an aging population and a lack of housing for younger families. Priorities that were established and confirmed by the council were agricultural preservation, residential and commercial growth, walking, biking, and horseback riding trails, and life stage housing. So those are just kind of overarching themes we tried to keep in mind. So, the land use element. This chapter includes the goals, it includes a list of goals specific to land use, discussion of the existing land use, community designation, forecast density, planned land use, and other information. Tonight I just want to focus on just a few critical elements and maybe get a little bit of feedback. First is the community designation. The Metropolitan Council establishes community designations for all of the communities in the 7-county metro areas. You can see in that little cutout map on the lower left. Scandia's current designation is a diversified rural. How the council makes these decisions, they look at existing development patterns, common challenges, what kind of developable land is available, age of housing stock, intersection density, which means how many streets you have, where the MUSA line is, or if there's sewage service, and essentially what's been happening over the years. Since Scandia is on the fringe of the metro area, it does have this rural, diversified rural designation. However, there is a designation called rural center, which often applies to some of the smaller, more towns that might be in the middle of an agricultural area. So we had a great deal of discussion about should Scandia embrace that diversified or that rural center designation. We discussed several options. Let's go back to that one, Neil. Several options about how this should be done. We talked about changing the whole city to a rural center. We looked at changing just certain areas or making no change at all. The steering committee and ultimately the council came up with this configuration. So the brown area that you see in the center would be the rural center, as well as a smaller area just to the west of Big Marine Lake. That's an area that I believe is having issues with septic systems and is hopefully looking for some sort of community system, whether it's public or extension of municipal service, whatever. But both the council and the steering committee felt that these would be areas that we should focus that rural center on. So now we can go. So to explain the difference to you, diversified rural is more of an area that's protecting land for long-term lifestyles and rural lifestyle and long-term urbanization. It's usually home to a variety of farm and non-farm uses, large areas of high natural resources, lots of prime agricultural soils. The rural areas rural centers on the other hand are often small town centers, usually have a village center or a city center, usually surrounded by agricultural land, usually have a mix of densities with a strong commercial core or a traditional downtown, and sometimes they may have wastewater treatment, sometimes not. The densities that are expected overall as an average density throughout the city. In the diversified rural, it's 4 units per 40. In the rural center, it's 3 to 5 units per acre. In Scandia, should we go to adding portions of rural center, that 3 to 5 units per acre will depend on having some sort of community system or municipal system. So it's not a given. It requires some infrastructure in some way, shape, or form. We had talked to my council early in the process about how would they feel. They really didn't have any issues with Scandia going rural center. We'll have to talk to them more about how they feel about the two separate areas. Although I don't think they'll have an issue. I think the biggest impact will probably happen in the next round of comp plans if we go that way, because then they'll be looking at different density levels for that. The impact of changing the community designation, as I said, is probably more further down the road, but in general, the land use plan has to show that there's enough available land to meet the forecasted growth. And keep in mind, the densities that we talk about, whether it's 4 per 40 or 3 to 5 units per acre, is an overall density and average of the entire city, not just individual densities. At the current densities, Scandia right now has more than enough land to accommodate the projected growth. So at this point, I think I'm just going to ask you, any thoughts about that designation, or should we just continue to move forward?
I'm confused. We're talking about two different designations.
That's correct.
So how do you average those two, or are you not averaging them?
Right now, I'm working off of what the zoning is and the development is. Ultimately, as I said, I think that impact will be longer range down the road at the next round. The council will look at those then.
So are you talking about the consequences to 4 and 40, or the consequences to 3 or 5 in an acre?
And the consequences of 3 to 5 per acre.
And that would be relegated to the
Right.
city center.
So ultimately, if we would change the zoning, but again, that 3 to 5 units per acre depends on having some sort of, whether it's a community system or a municipal system or something like that.
So the rural center designation, we can set up additional areas, expand on the existing rural center?
Great, that would be the proposal.
Okay.
So there's no rural center in Scandia right now. We're showing those 2 brown areas would be new
Okay.
designation.
But in a future comp plan, if you wanted to make those bigger, you could make that argument to the Met Council.
If you turn around and look at the map on the wall,
Right.
you know, what's basically in the blue there and the copper color, if you want to call it copper, that's our two village mixed-use areas and what's called the Village Neighborhood District. So really, it's an expansion of the Village Neighborhood District.
That's exactly what it
That
is.
all becomes rural center.
Well, he's talking zoning. They're
Yeah,
talking
this is
designation.
designation.
Two
Yeah,
separate things.
designation.
But
But
it's-
the
the zoning
zoning
would change.
would then be adjusted to follow the
It needs
designation.
to be consistent. I mean, this is the basis for it, and then later you turn it into your zoning and ordinance.
Okay.
So by doing the village center, or the rural center, it would steer us towards denser growth in the village. And one of the things that we talked about in the comp plan is the need for housing in Scandia.
Right.
And one of the benefits of having a rural center area or a center area is maintaining, so there's 2 things, is we need housing, but we also want to maintain the rural character. So the idea here is that you could maintain your rural character for the majority of the city and allow denser growth in the village areas, which would kind of meet both requirements. 'Cause you can't, the other option is just to continue to split up all of these larger lots, which I think, in my opinion, is detrimental eventually to maintaining the rural nature, the rural/ag nature, because that's the other thing, is ag's got to have big lots.
Yeah, and I think, Jane, may have it someplace else, but I think when you look at it, if you restrict 4 per 40 and you look at, we need to create, the expected growth of 594 households,
In the next 10 years, is that 10 years or 40?
13 years.
Okay.
So you look at that, and 4 per 40 is 1 per 10.
Yeah.
So that means you're going to consume 5,940 acres of
Right.
undeveloped land.
Right.
Unless you concentrate some density. So that's really the choice, and I think, from the comp plan discussions, from the steering committee, from the council, preserving the rural ag is important, but in order to get that and to meet the expected growth, we should probably, and also dealing with the other issues, in terms of affordability, attracting younger families, providing for senior housing, group those in concentrated areas.
Yeah, I like the concept. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so that's, it's kind of cluster development on a big scale.
Right, so yeah, it's like a big giant community.
And I don't have those numbers here, but if you look on the website, we did a presentation, I think to the council, and we had a table that showed,
And I think those are even at the public
Yeah.
open house.
yeah, so we do have that. So we're clear. The other piece of what the Met Council does as part of its system statements is provide forecasts for growth in the city out to the year 2040. These came out in about 2015. Right now, the growth forecast is expected to grow by about 1,054 people, 582 households, and add 190 jobs. And these again are forecasts. But what we have to do is make sure, as we're showing land use and guiding land use on the map, that we have land to meet that goal or that forecast. It doesn't mean that that will happen. It doesn't mean that it may not be bigger. It just means we have to be able to show that we have enough available land to meet those targets or those forecasts. So the next one is the future land use map, or the proposed future land use map. Not terribly different from the current land use plan map, with the exception of those rural center areas, which we are now identifying as village neighborhood. That kind of gold color here. The majority of land continues to be agricultural poor and general rural. We are recognizing the existing mining area. I believe there used to be one to the south, and we removed that.
Right.
They quit their
Right.
operation.
So we took that out. The St. Croix River corridors is still shown. We've added, we're showing parks and recreation and protected areas on the map. A little hard to see at this scale, but it's obviously like the big marine, St. Croix Park, St. William O'Brien, some of the reserve areas, wetlands, some of those areas. We have village mixed use, which is that darker orange color, the village neighborhood, and then there's a few pieces of rural commercial, one in the old Copas area and another down just at 15, and I think that's 4 in that area. So if we go to the next slide, you can see the gross acres. As I said, 65% of the land area is still agricultural or general rural. Most open water is pretty much the next size, and then everything else is below 10% in the land area. These are gross areas, so there's about over 25,000 acres. However, when we are looking at calculating densities, which is what we have to do to take that next step and make sure we have enough land available, we're using net acres, and net acres are the gross acres less. We take out existing development, wetlands, lakes, regional parks, protected areas, and those types of areas that are not developable. So we did residential density calculations, and we're able to, we used the units per acre right out of the current zoning ordinance. Again, thinking that 3 to 5 unit per acres is going to take some changes before we can do anything. We needed to say, well, where do we want this growth to occur? And so we looked at Well, most of it we want in the village neighborhood area, but there will be some in the general rural areas and a little bit in the agricultural core in the St. Croix River area, and even in the village mixed use area. Taking those desired distributions, how many units we need to get to 582, we know we need a little over 2,500 acres to meet the requirement, to have land to develop to meet that forecast. And right now, there's about 14,000 developable acres, so we're well within range of what we need to meet the goals. We have to do the same thing for employment calculations. In this density of jobs or jobs per acre, there's a variety of formulas used to figure it out. I'm not going to go into that. But as it turns out, as I said, we're expected to have 190 additional jobs by 2040. We need anywhere between 3 and 14 acres to do that. We have about 188 developable acres. So again, well within that. These job calculations don't include things like home occupations or telecommuters. They don't include the permitted uses that you might find in agricultural districts or some of the farming business uses. So we're clearly more than adequate to meet the jobs calculation. Any questions about that or the land use plan?
Okay, can we ask questions, or is this just directed to you guys?
This is supposed to be just a discussion. But there will be a public discussion soon.
It always feels too late.
Well,
Could I ask you a question and then just...
sure.
What bothers me about the previous statistics is that you're using the rural corridor, the rural, I have a farm, and I'm really interested in maintaining agricultural land in Scandia, which seems to be the public opinion, right? But you're including those developable acres even among the agricultural acreage, which we want to retain as agricultural, so in my opinion, they're not developable acres. So why are they included?
Yeah, that's a good question. Fortunately, if you look at that, this is only asking for 2,500 acres and there's 14,000 available. So I'm hoping that a lot of that is left available as farm.
See, but if you look at the calculations up there, you know, based upon the, you know, the allocation, if you look in Ag Core, we would be using, you know, 29 units averaging 291 acres, and we have 5,800 available. So you're using that's saying in 2040, we're using 5% of our agricultural core, which is, you know, it's not an insignificant, but really, you know, in terms of totality, in 17 years, that's, you know, not a major impact.
Right.
You know, and the same thing could be said for in the general rural, you're using, you know, what is that? 12, 13% of our core to accommodate the growth. So, I mean, you know, so Pam, to answer your question, you know, this really is, you know, if you say, we need to grow by roughly 600 households, 29 of those are projected to be in the Ag Core property, which is really a pretty minor increase.
And that's why, and I am 100% agree with you on what you're saying. But if we have to realize some growth, that's why I kind of like to advocate for the village center. Let's group as many houses as we can. And this is not saying that we can't do 582 houses in the village neighborhood areas. We could fit all of those in the village neighborhoods. This is not a requirement. This is just some projections saying this is an idea.
You know what happens when the 56 acres adjacent to your agricultural field are considered prime residential. But your ag field is no longer agricultural.
Right.
It is now prime residential.
Yeah.
So from, the standpoint of estate planning, future development after you're long gone, it's no longer going to be an agricultural area. Simply by dint of the fact that it's next to an area that's going to be developed. So just so you know, the consequence of this is not just what happens on the land that you're designating, it's what happens to all the adjacent lands to these designations.
Right.
And we are going, one of the values of
Yeah.
agricultural land is not only view shed, but it's also this sort of practical retention of arable land.
Food producing.
Right now, Scandia
I
is
agree.
50% undeveloped, more than that. This is a prime situation for retaining agricultural land towards the future. If we don't, it won't be here.
Yeah, yeah. And when we have the public discussion, I suggest come and come with ideas. This is not set in stone. We can change this. If you have ideas, that's why I kind of go towards that. Let's preserve that rural ag land and let's put if we have to have growth, we have two options, either growth or no growth. And assuming that we want growth, I don't know, I could be argued against on that, but assuming that we do want some growth, the growth has to go somewhere. And so, that's why I advocate for let's bunch it all together and save those large tracts. And I get that is, I'm in real estate, so I know, that field anyways. And so I understand values and what happens when there's residential growth next to farms and stuff like that. I get it. But we can't control that, other than by zoning is the only way we can control, right? So we have to zone it something. So we zone it ag core to maintain those big lots as much as we can and group that growth zoned elsewhere. Sherry?
So mine is sort of the opposite question, and this is a question based on some of the same discussion during the last comprehensive plan, which I didn't work on, but I heard the discussions as well. And that was, there was a lot of this discussion during the development of the plan of maintaining the big lots on the edge, focusing the growth in the center, trying to use options like transfer of development rights to push growth into the center. And the people who lived in the village neighborhood totally rebelled and said, we don't want our part of the city to be denser than it is now. And so I think part of and I'm hoping they've been involved in these discussions or will be, so you're getting a gauge on whether you'll meet that. Because subsequent to the comp plan, it really changed things at the very end of the comp plan the last time. Because there was a pushback on that greater density in the center. And it impacted discussions like, at the end of the comp plan then, we looked at transfer of development rights, which I see in here again as one of the creative, it's so funny to me because it's like been a creative option since the early 1980s when I started planning. But the thing that, one of the biggest pieces of why the city did not really go ahead with transfer of development rights was that the people in the receiving area, i.e. the village neighborhood, did not want to be the receiving area. And so I think you need to have those discussions at some point here before you get to the end.
I think one of the things that's happened is that, probably if you look at the demographics, the community has aged significantly. And I think, there are really two gaps, and I think Jane touched on those. Number one, the increased elderly population, and also we've pretty much priced young families out of the community. So, you look at it and, if you stayed 4 per 40, you're going to be living in an area where $400,000 plus house prices are the norm. And what that does is it excludes that, and I think in your charts, I don't know if you have it in your presentation, there's one chart where you sit there and see, there's, it's a curve like this, and the narrow part is the 30 to 40 age group in our community. The wide part is 65 and up. So those people who said, 10 years ago, we don't want to have density, are now looking for smaller homes, I think, and are looking for places to live, and how do you accommodate them affordably?
Right, and it doesn't, because you have small lots, does not necessarily mean you have affordable housing.
Right.
There's plenty of $700,000 townhomes on quarter acre lots.
Yeah,
I mean,
agreed,
that's,
agreed. Yeah,
But and I'm not taking either side of the question. I'm just wanting to make sure you have this discussion now, because in the last comp plan, it came out at the very end. And suddenly, all the people who felt that the units were gonna be put in their neighborhood decided they didn't want that. And it
Yeah.
really changed it at the end. And then the other things that I would say from the last comp plan, that when we tried to operationalize it in terms of the ordinance, that are just things to think about here. And then I'll leave so that I'm not polluting your process here anymore. But I noticed in this one, there are a number of overlay districts planned, like quite a number.
Nothing that wasn't in the plan before.
Right, but a lot of those in the plan before never got operationalized. And that was because after that plan was adopted, the woman who was the city administrator at the time, who had been a planner and a community development director for most of her life, and the planning commission looked at that and said, 90% of Scandia is going to be in an overlay district, and some parts of the city are going to be in 2 or 3 overlay districts, and it's going to be too crazy to administer. So my thought would be to just think that through as you think about those overlay districts and whether there's going to be that, because then it was like we just said, okay, we have to simplify this a little bit. And then the last thing I noticed tonight is there's some proposals for those shoreland overlays in here that are kind of based on the current shoreland overlay ordinance. And if we make a change after the public hearing in the lot sizes and stuff that you guys are going to permit in shoreland, that's going to need to be consistent with whatever you say in the comp plan. So that would just be
I have no objection to just making it the shoreline overlay district.
Yeah.
The only other one is the agricultural preserves overlay district.
Yeah.
That,
And those actually, that has to be its own zoning district, not an overlay.
that's what I always felt, but I always also believed it had to be planned for permanent agricultural use. And I think the overlay district is a way that people tried to get around that and still get in the agricultural preserve.
I think by
don't have any
state-
objection to taking it out.
By state law, I believe it needs to be its own zoning district. And that's because I went through this with the previous city administrator before, who wanted to use the overlay. And then we bumped up against the Met Council at the end. So I would have a discussion with them, because in the other communities where I work, we've had to make it a zoning district. And I believe it's by state law that it has to be its own district, not an overlay.
I looked, the state law was very unclear.
Or is it, yeah, so talk to the Met Council staff on ag preserves, because I know the last time the comment, it came at the end, again from the Met Council saying this can't be an overlay district, it must be its own zoning district, and then it made a lot of changes in the plan. So I would deal with that
North Branch
now.
has their ag preserve as a zoning. It's not an overlay.
And
But it
Baytown,
doesn't need that, as agricultural preserve doesn't need to be in the plan, it needs to be shown as agricultural on the land use plan.
but in zoning, it
district
needs
is
to be its
zoning.
own district,
Okay.
rather than an overlay district in zoning.
Yeah, this came right out of the existing plan.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to throw those thoughts in before I head out here and let you talk about your comp plan, because it's always frustrating if you're sort of reinventing the wheel or
Yeah.
whatever. And I know
Yeah.
some of these were talked about 20 years ago and kind of how some of it turned out. So I think it's worth it for you to know about those
Yeah.
discussions. That whole thing with transfer of development rights, that was, I know it's some people's favorite thing, but we looked at it so hard about how to do it here, and finding where was willing to be a receiving zone was one big barrier. A second is that you need a very active real estate market to help set the price,
We do not have an active real estate.
and that's a drawback in Scandia.
Why, so the transfer of development
Well,
rights.
Do you want to stay on this, or you want to stay on?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I'm only bringing it up because I'm gonna head
Yeah,
out, but
right.
it's tricky, and so it's been talked about before, and I hate to see you guys totally reinvent the wheel and all.
Yeah, I
so-
remember talking about that before with you on some other issue. I don't remember what it was, but.
Yeah. So, anyway, those are my thoughts, but I will let you play comp plan.
Thank you, Sherry.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other thoughts about the map? Okay, the next piece is really kind of almost a housekeeping kind of piece. There's certain requirements we have to have for solar protection, natural resource protection, and economic competitiveness. Right now, we have rolled all of those into the land use chapter. Solar protection, there's a map. We've also incorporated the steps, the green steps, steps the city's already taken. Natural resources and economic competitiveness are primarily goals and how we build those goals. My only question is, if you have a preference, would you like to see a separate chapter for those, or?
Natural resources protection seems like it should be in land use, but in possibly solar protection. That involves like maintaining light and air to other properties, right?
Right, there's some data and maps that the council's put together that we have to incorporate, and then essentially much of what you did tonight, taking your existing, talking about what the city already does to preserve access for solar energy.
Yeah, okay. Economic competitiveness seems to be an inappropriate place in land use, to me.
But one of the things that Jane had mentioned is you have to provide for a certain amount of job growth. And that
Okay, based on
entails, where is
zoning.
it gonna be?
Okay,
Some-
You know,
so it
what,
makes sense.
well,
Okay.
you know, do you have significant land that's dedicated to accommodate that job growth?
Here
So I
would be a
think that-
really short chapter.
Okay.
Some communities have much larger initiatives, much more that they want to build.
Right, right.
It's, you know, and it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Yeah, sure.
Either way, we'll
Okay.
get it in there.
Okay. That's,
Yeah, I'd feel very
That makes
different
sense,
if we
yeah.
were Woodbury or someplace
Yeah,
like that where
yeah.
you've got, where you're really planning for a huge number of jobs, but we're not.
Yeah.
It really is a land use decision.
Right,
Yeah,
and you're looking
okay.
at many more different kinds of strategies and
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
makes sense.
Okay. The next element that we want to talk about is the housing element. Again, this includes goals, objectives. We do an existing housing assessment, a discussion of housing needs, and a housing implementation plan. My feeling, this is going to be a really scrutinized chapter this time around. It's a new chapter requirement that wasn't in the last plan. The good news is Scandia does not have an affordable housing allocation, which makes our job a lot easier.
That's a good thing.
So these are the existing housing conditions. We talk about total occupied housing units, 98% of which are single family, and 2% are multifamily. About 90% are owner occupied versus rental. And using the affordable or the area median income that the council has established, we talked about how many of those are actually considered affordable, but not necessarily, but there are still a number of households in the city who are experiencing a housing cost burden, which means they're paying more than 30% of their income for housing. If we go to the next slide, this slide shows the location of housing values. This 238.5 is kind of the number that the Met Council uses, I think, as their low end of housing. Everything below that is within that 80% or more affordable. And then everything above that is higher end housing. Right now, the average median, or the median housing value in Scandia is over $293,000. That's higher than Forest Lake, higher than the county average as a whole. You can see the light yellow are the 238.5 and below. The darker colors are over that. The brown is over 450 and the red is between 300 and 450. So Scandia, you can see, has a great deal of higher end housing scattered throughout the community, especially where you would expect it along the lake shores, the river area. The next piece that we're going to have to include, even though there are not affordable housing goals, we still have to have like an affordable or an implementation plan and how we want to meet the housing goals that we have. And the goals and objectives for housing talk a lot about creating multi-generational living, maintaining existing units, and some new housing construction. So we've identified a variety of tools that may or may not be used. Not all of them are cities. So I think this is something the Planning Commission should take a look at and decide, do these tools make sense? Is there an order of importance? We even have the ability, for example, tax increment financing. You know, yes, that's a tool. The city has the ability to say, that's not something we're really going to use, but we should put it in there and say that. This is just, right now, I think for informational purposes, but I think it's important to think about these tools because this is a piece that's going to be scrutinized.
By the Met Council? But scrutinized by whom?
Pardon?
You think this is an area that will be scrutinized
The
by?
Met Council.
By Met Council.
So the next chapter that we have today is Parks and Trails, and again, this is pretty basic. We're talking about the regional parks and trails in the city and the local parks and trails. So if we go to the next slide, this is the current regional parks and trail map that identifies, obviously, Big Marine, William O'Brien, some of the wildlife management areas are the natural areas owned by the DNR. And I understand we need to make some adjustments on these.
Restroom gets to move up.
Yeah. Yeah, we're trying to work off county records and, but, you know, no big surprises here. We've gone a little bit steps further because this was a big issue with the steering committees and so if we go to the next one, one of the big things that we talked a great deal about at the steering committee were regional trail considerations and connections, taking advantage of the connections to the Hardwood Creek Trail. You can see some of these are even outside of Scandia, but we wanted to show them. So this Glacial Hills Trail, that's kind of part way or proposed and could eventually connect into Hardwood Creek. The Gateway Trail, which has right-of-way and an alignment partway through the city, but eventually the idea would be to bring that all the way north and eventually connect up to that Swedish Immigrant Trail. So not looking just even at Scandia or at just the neighboring communities, but a much larger regional area and how we can connect to some of these trails that already exist. Then the next map, these are the local parks. You see lots of arrows and lines. Most of the parks and recreational areas are currently within the village area. There's a few scattered about in some of the other developments, not a lot. One of the questions we asked at the open house, and we didn't get a lot of response, but we asked if there were areas in the city that we should identify search areas for other parks, because if you look, this is a little cleaner version. Again, all the parks are in kind of centered in the village. There's not a lot other than the state parks out further out. Now, when we asked the question to folks, we got no response. Nobody felt that there needed to be any at the open house. I don't know if that's a general consensus, but it's something, again, to think about. And this is where, if the Planning Commission Council feels we should have identified search areas, this is where we would do it. And search areas are basically just a circle on the map. We think this area is going to be developed should there be some sort of park here.
How do you determine park needs?
You know, it's community by community preference. Some communities go in as far as, well, for every, we want everybody in the city to be within a quarter mile of some sort of park. Now, it's not really very realistic in Scandia, but.
Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, I mean, if you look at the vast majority of people who live outside the village center, they're living on acreage.
Most likely, yes.
So parkland is not like something that they're really after.
Right.
Unless they want to go to Big Marine Park or William O'Brien, which is where they should be.
Yeah, but then there are other areas, I mean, because we've had this discussion at parks, you look at something, let's say, the Bliss Edition. Where you have probably within a very defined area, 100 residents, and, granted, they do have some limited access to the lake, but there are no parks.
Right, okay.
So there may
There's
be
Big Marine right
opportunities.
there.
Big Marine's
Big Marine's
just
right there.
south of them.
Yeah.
What, a half
But I mean,
mile?
how many people are going to, take their kids out onto 15 to go, to go down there becomes another question.
Sure.
Now,
So
they
there's
also
nothing
did talk
they
about
can-
connecting with Big Marine off of 185th, where they wouldn't have to go out onto the highway.
Yeah.
But if you start having a village neighborhood district, should a quote area be designated for a park, somewhere near that.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah, if you have that, the second, yeah.
Well, the other thing is Big Marine owns a chunk up north of the vets camp.
Right,
That, and I don't
yep,
see
south
on
side
that
of
map.
185th.
Is it on that map?
It's right, this stuff in here.
You can't see your mouse.
Oh, my mouse doesn't show up, doesn't mine. Sorry. But if you look at the top northern border of the green there.
That's where it is? Okay.
That's where it is. That's 185th, which
Right.
is right where the Bliss Edition starts. That's the south
Right,
edge of the
yeah,
Bliss
just right
Edition.
across the street, so
Yeah.
yeah, you'd think they'd be able to get through to that.
But you have to have controlled access to Big Marine because you have to pay to get in. So there's
Actually, not to
controlled
walk in,
Really?
no,
Hmm.
no, just drive a car. You can walk in, bike in,
But I think
whatever.
we even talked about that at Parks and Rec. Is there an opportunity to do some cooperative with the county that would allow some limited development there, of that area as, both, a quasi, city park, with the county there. That may be an opportunity for some recreational cooperation.
Yeah.
We will also be including the trails maps that is from the plan that was done, I think, just in 2011.
Yeah, the Friends.
Park. So we will include those. Again, that was a priority. Primarily, those trails tend to be along the major roadways, so we will include, those will be included in the plan as well. So,
When we're calling these trails, are we calling the roads trails, or does that indicate like some sort of like paved path off of the road itself?
identified trails would be they would be designated. So in some cases, they might be on the shoulder.
Okay.
But when you see those, you see the shoulder is wider, it's paved.
Okay.
Usually there's the little bikey thing on it or
Okay.
something, or there's a sign. And mostly those are bike trails. Walking trails tend to be off the road, but they're
Yeah.
paved. So I think the map, when we're doing the planning, we're really looking at where, if possible, could it be to add trails infrastructure.
Okay.
You know, that, and again, for the most part, it is on the major roadway system, so it takes coordination with the state, the county, and, you know, and that tends to be a city share of a cost. So I think as infrastructure is developed and improved, the city will want to look at each of those critically and say, where should the trails be? How much is the city willing to contribute to that?
Okay.
Well, I think the other thing in there in terms of trails that, I mean, you know, granted we had what was in 2011, but if you're looking at a larger, quote, village neighborhood district, you know, those are the opportunities to have something that's a core that's very, very walkable. And I think that probably needs to be added where you can link that district to the schools, to the downtown, so that you do have more of, you know, that kind of that traditional rural core.
Yeah.
So, if we look at what's next, as I said, there's a few more chapters to look at. Transportation, these are more of the technical chapters. Water resources include surface water, sewer, and water supply. And then the last chapter is the implementation plan and how we go about what kind of tools are available to implement the entire plan. So those will be coming. Our timeline here, as you see, we're in the preparing, delivering the draft plan. So over the next couple of months, I think the Planning Commission public hearing, is kind of shown in there about March, April-ish, followed by City Council review, and it's not official adoption. That at that point, it's more okaying it to go out. You asked, as Neil mentioned, we have to submit this to the adjacent, or it's actually the affected jurisdictions, which include the adjacent communities, school districts, DNR, MnDOT, county, a variety of areas. They have 6 months to review the plan. Hopefully, try to encourage them to get it done a little quicker. And sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes if you don't hear anything after 6 months, then you can go. But we want that out by June, so we can know that 6 months ends in December. Council will then have to take action to send it on to the Met Council. So final adoption of the plan will most likely happen sometime in early 2019. After the Met Council review has completed. And to give you an idea, the Met Council doesn't have the authority to approve it or deny it in that respect, but they can come back with comments that say, you're not meeting this, you're not meeting that, or you need to adjust this or that. It has to be consistent with the regional plan. So what we have to do at that stage is bring it back and address whatever comments they might have. Now, hopefully, we've been talking to them about issues as we go, and hopefully we won't see a lot of that, but you just don't really know.
And the Met Council reviews it after the neighboring cities review it.
Yes. So the good news is we're on schedule. We'll be posting this. I think what we have is still kind of a pretty rough draft, but I think when we're ready, we'll start posting on the website. I can post tonight's presentation out there, so that information is still out there, so it's up to date.
And I think, as these chapters are being drafted, if you take the time to look at those, if you have comments, concerns, or anything like that, relay them to me, and I'll forward them on to Jane.
Okay.
We talked about earlier, though, doing the shoreland ordinance in April, and if this comes up in April, you don't want to have two big ones on the same meeting, and just a potential conflict is something to think about.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Or we may just do it as a separate meeting. I think is probably the best way of doing it.
There you go.
The same month, do a comp plan meeting the following week or something?
Something like that. Because a lot of times, now in terms of timing, like an ordinance, a shoreline ordinance, I mean, one of the issues now under state law, we need to have public notice 10 days before it goes to the council. So, the two things that were approved tonight, I'll get out there, I'll send out the requisite notices so that the council can take action at their meeting.
Okay.
But when you look at something like the comp plan, the public hearing there, we don't have to specifically take action right away. We're not looking at council action till probably, either the May meeting or the June meeting. So we do have time, and you do have that period to make those final adjustments.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we're right on schedule.
Okay.
So I'm not worried at all about
So,
it.
but we need to be spending time as a commission taking these offline and
Yeah. Comments, concerns, whatnot.
Yeah. And when the public hearing is not, if we don't do that in April, that'll be on the entire comp plan at once. It won't be partial like we
Yeah, we won't. Yes, and I'll work with Neil to figure out how we should present clearly it's pretty, won't be as big as the current plan, but it's still there's a lot of information in the plan.
I feel like, and this is just a thought, perhaps, and maybe this doesn't work because it's kind of holistic, but maybe one of the things we do sometimes is just when we're looking at a specific ordinance, we'll take a section at a time. We'll say, okay, is everybody okay with this? So maybe, I don't know, for the public that would be seriously time consuming probably, but like say, okay, this is the home portion, the housing portion of it. you know, what are your comments on this housing portion? And then we have a discussion on it and say, okay, we're okay with,
You can structure the hearing, I mean, we can do it that way at the hearing,
okay, oh, okay.
if you want.
Okay.
I mean, we can do, okay, here's, it's a whole plan. but
Yeah,
Here's the land use, okay, comments.
yeah.
But the other piece we have to remember is they all tie together.
They all tie together, that's what I was saying, yeah,
So,
it's kind of a
you know,
holistic thing.
as much as we'd like to be able to be mutually exclusive, what we do in the
Yeah.
land use impacts the water resources.
Right.
So it all ties in together.
Sure,
And honestly, where people are gonna have the comments, land use, housing,
Yeah,
maybe
okay.
transportation.
okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, yeah, thank you, yeah. All right, so that was our last discussion for the evening. So, items for future agendas, we already have the review of the, wait, no, that's what we reviewed today. Housing, transportation, no, we didn't do transportation, did we?
No.
No,
No.
water resources, so housing. we
Those
got.
are kind of the next ones I thought we had on there.
Okay.
Actually, we snuck housing up.
We did housing already, okay. Anything else for future agendas?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Looks like our next meeting is, got cleared, since we're not doing the shoreline ordinance next time.
And I can't think of anything else that's coming through in terms of applications.
Okay.
So maybe we can, have a little bit more time here, and even if you have questions, I'll raise those with Jane and we can do a
Okay.
loop back.
Okay,
But just remember, next month
it's on the 13th.
on the 13th.
Okay, and maybe we can get Jane and Travis to comment on this.
We'll send this out to them.
Yeah, okay. Okay, our next meeting is February 13th, as Neil said, and if there's nothing else, you have a motion to adjourn? No, you,
One quick
yeah,
question. Have you guys ever discussed the Trail Center corner?
the what?
Trail Center corner,
Trail
97 and 95, that's now for sale. Trails End.
Trails in.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah, we talked about it, it's not big enough, right? for
Well,
commercial?
you may be, it all depends on what you're going to do.
Okay.
So I think they did, what's on our GS and what's on the county is not always the most accurate. I found out after talking to the county about their sign location,
Oh,
that the county must have, or the state must have sold some of their right-of-way to
oh,
the trails in, so it's a little bit bigger, but it's still gonna be a challenge to develop that property.
okay.
That's why it's down to 400.
It's on for 400,000? Oh, that's way too much.
Well, I wanted $1 million before, but that was a long time ago.
Wow. Well, yeah,
I mean, would a future roundabout take some of that again?
sure would.
If that was in their future, the land that they sold would have been needed for a roundabout, so they may have just wiped themselves out of a roundabout.
Oh, but we
Because
need a roundabout there.
there's been
There?
talk about a roundabout.
What?
You don't need a roundabout there.
Yeah, we do.
In the morning,
That's a terrible
everybody coming up 95 goes down 97, so you don't have to worry about getting out there. Nobody's coming from the south and heading north. I don't know.
You don't think
When
so?
I go there, I don't have any issues ever.
I guess I never use that except for, I don't know, weekends, I guess.
At 97 in Manning would be
Yes.
very nice, but.
There'll be one there
yeah.
too, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah,
I know MinDOT's looked at it,
yeah.
and also putting a little pull-off view of the St. Croix area over there.
Oh, yeah,
On
yeah,
95.
95, yeah. That would be nice.
I was just curious if you guys were discussing.
The view is
that.
ruined now, so it doesn't
I
matter.
know. I'm gonna cut those down.
I would love it. All right, we made a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Thanks for all your hard work.